So when I first decided I was going to go and work in the tech industry, an awful lot of my friends and colleagues were, I think, politely horrified. They said, but come on, Margaret, you've spent your life working in film and television and radio and working with artists and creatives. Why do you want to go and work in tech? All those right-brained, rules-bound people, really? And the answer was, yeah, really, really. Because I believed then, and I believe still, that actually the technology industry is a phenomenally creative industry, and it's full of incredibly creative people who run towards uncertainty because they know that that's where great discovery and invention is to be found, and they know that that's a space in which they can grow. And I believe that to this day, despite all the difficulties that all of us are confronting at the moment. And I believe it, I think, even more powerfully, since in the last 2 years I spent a lot of time hanging out with and interviewing all kinds of artists around the world. Filmmakers, composers, novelists, poets, playwrights, actors, directors, singers, you name it. Really trying to get under the skin of the creative mindset and the creative process and the creative approach to life, not just to work, but to life as a whole. And I think that there is an awful lot of, not just coincidence, an awful lot of parallels between the way that artists work and the way that all of the really brilliant thousands of people that I worked alongside in the tech industry work, and the way that they approach life. And I think it's really helpful for those of us right now facing incredible uncertainty in the industry and in the world in terms of thinking about how we deal with that in a really creative way. So what I found was that actually almost all creative processes, all creative projects, start with something that does not look like work at all. It starts with basic, native, intrinsic curiosity. So everybody I spoke to, when I asked them, how do you spend their days, what they described did not sound like work. Well, they wander around a bit. They kind of notice stuff. Is there an agenda? No, there's no agenda. They all seem to walk a lot, but without any particular plan. Margaret Atwood, William Gibson, Murakami, Dickens, Virginia Woolf, no matter what age, what country, what form, what medium you look at, they're spending a lot of time just wandering the world, picking up a sense of what's going on now, where are we, what's happening, what's interesting, what doesn't make sense, what might make sense. It looks like nothing is happening. But as the filmmaker Mike Leigh said to me, nothing happening is something happening. It brought to mind an interview I'd done with Jack Dorsey years ago when he was working at Twitter, where he talked to me about the fantastic experience he'd had when he was in Texas visiting a friend who was an art sculptor and going to an art fair. Why was he going to the art fair? No reason, but he'd never been to an art fair before, so there was probably something to learn. Something, who knows if it'd be helpful or not. Whether it gets filed in the back brain or a notebook or a file, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of collecting information. But for what? Nobody knows at the time. That means a lot of patience, waiting to see, well, is any of this going to add up to anything? It might. It might also, as the novelist Sebastian Barry said to me, add up to a pile of malodorous nonsense. Right? It may all turn out to be a waste of time. It's definitely not obviously efficient. Except that they all know that sooner or later, the sort of iron filings of noticing start to coalesce around the magnet of a theme or an idea or an insight. There are no guarantees that that's going to lead to something, but it is something. And sooner or later, a choice has to be made. And again, the choice is a moment of huge risk. If it's the wrong idea, it could have a huge opportunity cost. If it's an idea that's going to take forever to accomplish, that's an opportunity cost too. For artists in particular, time has incredible, incredible value. But sooner or later, a choice is made. And it's usually made without huge amounts of data and without huge amounts of planning or detail. I was kind of astonished to discover that novelists write really complex thrillers and plots and mysteries. So this is people like Lee Child or Murakami or the Nobel Prize winner Olga Tokarczuk. They all start these incredible novels with no outline, absolutely no plan. Tokarczuk wrote a fantastic murder mystery called Drive Your Plow Over My Bones. Only 2/3 of the way through, she said, did she figure out who the murderer was. It came as much of a surprise to her as it did to me while I was reading it. And of course, a lot of the pleasure in doing this work is finding where it's going to take you. It's the pleasure they get from doing it, and it's the pleasure we get from reading it. It's the pleasure that Jack Dorsey got when he suddenly realized, actually, that art fair, my friend, the glass sculptor, couldn't sell his big pieces. And that's because he wasn't a big enough business to have a credit card account. This is the days before paying with smartphones and so on. So he thought, well, that's an interesting problem. Maybe I can solve that problem. But he didn't know that he could. But once you've sort of got a focus, then all sorts of decisions start to come into play. It may be which word, which color, which instrument, which shape, which medium, what kind of thing is it that I'm dealing with. But it means that lots and lots of choices have to be made. And this can be really frightening. The American painter Faith Ringgold said she often used to have to pray before she started a painting. She thought it was so frightening. The British artist Tracy Emin says she often will sketch before she starts a painting because she needs to kind of get her courage up. So although the kind of common cliched stereotype of artists is that they're kind of feckless and lazy and childlike, in fact, exactly the opposite is the case, which is that they need to have quite a lot of courage, just as entrepreneurs have to have quite a lot of courage, because there are no guarantees at this point. So Jack Dorsey made the decision to go into tech shop in San Francisco and see if he could hack a plug-in for smartphones. Maybe he could turn a smartphone into a credit card reader. Could work, might not work. You don't know until you start and until you carry on and keep going. This capacity to keep going becomes absolutely fundamental. Lots of pivots, lots of setbacks, lots of surprises. But one of the things I found in all the artists I talked to who started a whole range of incredible, crazy projects is that whenever they hit some kind of barrier or problem, they saw this not as a defeat, they saw this as a challenge. Okay, are you up to this next stage? What else can you do? How much further can you go? This is the nature of the adventure, the pleasure of doing something, which is fundamentally uncertain. Sometimes, of course, this requires huge amounts of change and improvisation and courage. And sometimes that can be really fast. When Miles Davis set out to record his album, Kind of Blue, he chose a band made up of members who not very cordially hated each other. He was working with a producer he'd never produced an album with before, and he was using an approach to jazz that none of them had ever tried before. That's about as much uncertainty as you can get into one single album. In fact, the first track took 3 takes. The last track took 1. The entire album was recorded in just 2 sessions. At the end of it, Miles walked around the studio acting as if he was out of breath. He couldn't quite understand what he'd done yet. But sometimes the process is heartbreakingly slow. So when Peter Flannery set out to write what became his TV series, Our Friends in the North, it took 16 years of delays on the part of the BBC, changes in politics, which meant changes to the script. A script which, as the time went by, got longer and longer and longer because there was an episode for every year there was a general election. And during that time, he has to keep in his head 160 speaking parts. It was so difficult, he said, it nearly broke him. Kind of Blue, Our Friends in the North, at no point did either artist have any clue that what they were making were masterpieces. Miles Davis didn't know he would write what's come to be seen as the greatest jazz album of all time. Flannery had no concept that his TV series would be regarded as one of the top 3 TV series ever made. So there are no guarantees, because actually whether or not the project will work depends not just on the project itself, but on how it meets the world. And how it meets the world depends on what's happening in the world, something over which the artist has no control. And then when the project is finished, what do these artists mostly do? They change, much to the horror and often fury and disappointment of their fans. But what they don't want to do is repeat themselves. What's the point of doing what you've already done when the whole joy of creative work is to explore and discover more? That it is in that invention and expression that artists and creative people find and express their freedom. The creative process is the absolute opposite of efficiency. It starts with no plan. There are lots of dead ends. There are lots of pivots. There are lots of moments when the whole world changes and something becomes suddenly relevant or suddenly irrelevant. But the people who do it and who thrive in it understand that it is in ambiguity and uncertainty that there are opportunities to grow, to express themselves, to discover capacities in themselves and qualities in the world that they had never seen before. And that is their agenda. We live in an age that is defined by uncertainty. And it can be really frightening. But uncertainty has been with us throughout all history. And these days, forecasters will tell you that if you're a fantastic collector of data, a great capable of great analysis of data, and you consult lots of information sources, and you understand probability, which many mathematicians don't, and you're constantly tweaking your forecasts, then probably the furthest out you can see with any degree of reliability is 400 days. If you're not quite so scrupulous, it's closer to 150 days. And all forecasters will tell you that still means that complete surprises can jump up at you out of the blue. So our kind of tendency to move towards planning and efficiency and trying to nail everything down doesn't help us in this environment. In fact, I think it often makes us rely on the things that are most unreliable and depend on things that are most undependable. What I think serves us far greater is the capacity that we were always born with. All of us were born with, which is a capacity for creativity. And I look at all the creative people I've worked with and all the creative people that I've interviewed, and I think about what is it that they bring to the world. They bring curiosity. They bring the capacity to explore without agendas. They bring imagination. They bring courage to make a choice when there are no guarantees. They bring decisiveness, the capacity to make choices over and over again, to pivot, to change, to adapt, and to start afresh. Everyone in this room was born creative. Everyone still can be creative. You just have to start out in the world. Nobody ever had a great idea at a desk, trust me. Out in the world, noticing, asking questions, and remembering that what got you here is the creative capacity you have. And the only thing that can happen to that is for it to grow. Thank you very much.